Ozone Park, Queens, 1950s. A young man is climbing. Not through luck, not through charm, through violence, loyalty, and a calculated coldness that made even seasoned killers take notice. His name was Anthony Ruggiano, but nobody called him that. They called him Fat Andy, and Fat Andy was building something. He wasn't a footnote, he wasn't a side character, he was a captain in the most powerful crime family in American history. He ran one of the biggest crews the Gambino family had ever seen. And for decades, he never broke. Not once. Not for anyone. That's where this story starts. Albert Anastasia made him. That's not a small detail. That's everything. Anastasia was the Lord High Executioner, the man who ran Murder Incorporated, the most feared boss in New York, before Carlo Gambino had him killed in a barber chair in 1957. The men Anastasia made were not soft men. They were not political men. They were killers with structure. They were dangerous with discipline. Fat Andy was made in 1953 under Anastasia. He was in his mid-20s. He was already someone people feared. Getting made under Anastasia meant you weren't just enrolled in the mob. You were selected by a man who built his empire on blood, and you were expected to carry that same standard forward. Fat Andy did. He opened a cafe in Ozone Park in the 1960s. That sounds innocent. It wasn't. That cafe was a headquarters. It was a nerve center. It was where Gambino associates gathered, where decisions got made, where the crew operated under the cover of espresso and card games. Law enforcement didn't walk into that cafe and feel comfortable. The people inside it made sure of that. Every captain in the New York mob needs a base, a place where he controls the environment, where the walls have ears he trusts, where anyone who walks through the door does so on his terms. Fat Andy built that. He didn't wait for someone to hand him space. He created his own territory. That's how you build a crew that lasts. Paul Castellano promoted him to Capo Regime in the 1970s. Think about what that means. Castellano, cautious, business-minded, careful about who he elevated, looked at Fat Andy and decided he was the right man to run a crew. Not a small crew either. One of the biggest in the family. That's not an accident. That's a track record. A capo in the Gambino family isn't just a title. It's a responsibility. You collect, you earn, you keep your men in line, you handle problems before they reach the boss. You are, in every practical sense, a business owner operating inside a criminal empire. And the business only stays open as long as you perform. Fat Andy performed for decades. Then came John Gotti. December 1985, Paul Castellano is shot dead outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. Gotti takes over the family. The entire structure shifts overnight. Loyalties get tested, allegiances get questioned. Men who were comfortable under Castellano suddenly have to prove themselves under a boss who is louder, more reckless, and infinitely more visible. Fat Andy and Gotti had history. They came from the same neighborhood. Ozone Park produced both of them. That shared geography mattered in mob culture. It meant familiarity. It meant a foundation that predated rank and titles. But shared roots don't guarantee shared futures, and the 1980s were about to get complicated. He ran to Florida, and that tells you something. After Castellano's murder, the FBI started squeezing New York hard. Indictments were coming, surveillance was everywhere, men were flipping. The life that had operated in relative comfort for decades was suddenly under a microscope. Fat Andy read the situation and moved to Florida. This wasn't cowardice. This was calculation. Men who ran didn't always run out of fear. Sometimes they ran because staying meant getting caught before they were ready to fight. Fat Andy understood that a free man running an operation from Florida was more valuable than a caged man waiting for trial in New York. He kept working from down south. The distance didn't mean retirement, it meant relocation. 2 years as a fugitive, running with the Hells Angels. This is where Fat Andy's story separates itself from every other mob captain you've ever heard about. He wasn't hiding in a safe house under a fake name eating room service. He was running with a motorcycle gang, the Hells Angels, hardened, violent, fiercely territorial men who didn't take to outsiders easily. Fat Andy ran with them for 2 years. Think about what that requires. You are a Gambino captain, Italian mob royalty, and you are surviving inside a biker world that operates on entirely different codes. You are not in a social club in Queens. You are not surrounded by men who grew up respecting the same hierarchy you did. You are adapting. You are surviving by being useful and dangerous enough that nobody moves against you. He pulled it off. 2 years. Then they caught him. Racketeering. 13 years in prison. He didn't cooperate. That's the line that defined Fat Andy's entire legacy. When the government finally got him, when they had the evidence, when the pressure was on, Fat Andy looked at them and said nothing. 13 years is not a short sentence. 13 years means missing your family, watching the world change, watching the mob you served get dismantled piece by piece from the outside. 13 years means sitting with your decision every single day, knowing that one conversation with the right prosecutor could have cut that time in half or more. He served every year. In mob culture, that kind of silence carries weight that no title can match. Made men earn respect through their actions on the street. They earn permanent respect through what they do when the street is taken away from them, and all they have left is their word. Fat Andy kept his word. He had a philosophy about rats, and he said it out loud. Recorded on a wiretap, a Gambino soldier repeated what Fat Andy told him, words he apparently said often, words he lived by. You're born a rat. You're not made a rat. That's not just an opinion. That's a worldview. Fat Andy believed cooperation wasn't a choice someone made under pressure. He believed it was a character defect you either had or you didn't. The men who flipped, in his view, were always going to flip. The men who didn't were always going to hold. He used his own life as proof. The FBI came at him hard. They had surveillance. They had witnesses. They had the kind of evidence that makes men with families start calculating. Fat Andy never calculated. He never had that conversation. He was, in his own words, lived out across a lifetime, someone who was not made a rat. His son followed him in, and then his son flipped. Anthony Ruggiano Jr. became a Gambino associate. He followed his father into the life because the life was all around him growing up. It was the business. It was the air. When your father is Fat Andy, the mob isn't some distant criminal underworld. It's the neighborhood. It's the people at dinner. It's normal. Junior eventually cooperated with the government. He turned. He testified. He left the life and built a second career talking about it publicly, hosting a podcast, speaking to people about what the mob actually was behind the legend. Fat Andy died in March 1999, a heart attack in Ozone Park, Queens, the same neighborhood where it all started. He died without ever becoming a government witness. Without ever sitting across a table from a prosecutor and trading what he knew for what he wanted. His son did what he never did. That's not a judgment, that's just the record. Here's what people get wrong about Fat Andy. They see the nickname, Fat Andy, and they picture a slow, comfortable mob boss who coasted on his reputation. They picture a man who sat in the back of restaurants and collected envelopes and let younger, harder men do the dangerous work. That's not who he was. The man was made under Murder Incorporated's boss. He survived as a fugitive inside a biker gang for 2 years. He served 13 years in a federal prison without saying a word. He ran one of the biggest crews in the Gambino family during an era when the FBI was systematically destroying the New York mob. He was there at the start, when the mob was at its most powerful, and he was still standing when most of his generation was dead or in prison or cooperating. Fat Andy outlasted almost everyone from his era, not by luck, by being exactly what the mob rewarded: hard, quiet, loyal, and dangerous enough that nobody tested him twice. He died in Ozone Park in 1999. Same zip code where he was born, same streets where he learned the rules. He came back to Queens after everything, after Florida, after the fugitive years, after the prison sentence, and he died at home. No federal witness protection, no book deal, no tell-all interview. He went back to the neighborhood and he died there as himself. Anthony Ruggiano, Fat Andy. Gambino Caporegime, made man under Albert Anastasia. Captain under Paul Castellano. Loyalist through 13 years of federal imprisonment. He never gave them anything. That's how he wanted to be remembered. And in mob circles, that memory is exactly what he got. If you enjoyed watching the film on Fat Andy, the most dangerous man nobody warned you about from the Goodfellas, then you'll want to see our film on why Sopranos never showed who Vincent, Vinny Ocean Palermo really was popped up on the upper left of your screen.